At the beginning of something new, you often feel unusually focused. You reorganize your schedule, set clear goals, and commit with intensity. For a short period, your discipline seems stronger than usual. Then, gradually or abruptly, your energy drops. What felt important a week ago now feels heavy or strangely distant. This pattern is common enough that many people treat it as a personality trait. I just lose interest. I'm not consistent. The explanation sounds simple, but the simplicity hides something more complex. Starting something new does not only require action, it requires exposure to uncertainty. A new job, a new routine, a new relationship, even a new hobby. Each of these changes your internal structure. You move from a familiar system, where expectations are known, into a space where you are being evaluated, where outcomes are unclear, and where your competence has not yet been confirmed. That transition creates tension. The early surge of energy often feels like motivation, but it is frequently mixed with vigilance. You think more about how you are performing. You compare yourself to an imagined standard. You try to move quickly so that doubt does not catch up. On the surface, this looks productive. Internally, it can be expensive. Most people do not recognize this because high activation is socially rewarded. Intensity is praised. Rapid commitment looks admirable. The exhaustion that follows is interpreted as a failure of character, not as a predictable reaction to pressure. The problem is not that you start enthusiastically. The problem is that the way you start may be driven by tension rather than stability. And tension, even when it feels productive, cannot sustain itself indefinitely. To understand why this pattern repeats, it helps to look at how effort and safety were linked earlier in life. For many people, performance was not neutral. It was connected to approval, stability, or emotional security. A child who received attention mainly when achieving something learns a simple association. Effort brings connection. Results bring relief. Starting strong becomes a way to secure position. In such an environment, slowing down was not rewarded. Consistency was less visible than intensity. The brain adapted by developing a fast activation response. When something new appeared, a task, a challenge, a role, the system reacted quickly. High effort meant lower risk of criticism or exclusion. Another common scenario is unpredictability. If a person grew up in a context where expectations shifted or evaluation was inconsistent, they may have learned to anticipate scrutiny. Starting something new then activates a familiar state. I need to prove myself before I am judged. The initial surge of energy is not only ambition, it is preparation for potential threat. Over time, the brain optimizes for what helped in the past. It becomes efficient at short bursts of high output. Stress hormones increase alertness and concentration. This feels like motivation, but the same system is not built for long, stable engagement. After the immediate threat passes, or after the person feels they have demonstrated competence, the nervous system reduces activation. Fatigue follows. For example, someone begins a new job and works late every day for the first 2 weeks. They respond quickly, volunteer for tasks, aim to exceed expectations. Once basic security is established, their energy collapses. The intensity was not sustainable, it was protective. This mechanism is not irrational, it is adaptive. It simply developed for conditions that required rapid proof rather than steady pacing. In adult life, this mechanism often looks like ambition and competence. At work, the person who burns out quickly when starting something new is frequently the one who takes initiative first. They enter a new role with visible intensity, volunteer for responsibility, and aim to secure their position early. Colleagues may see reliability. What remains less visible is the internal pressure driving it. After the initial phase, energy drops. The project feels heavier, even if the objective difficulty has not changed. The person may interpret this as boredom or loss of passion. In reality, the nervous system is recalibrating after a period of sustained tension. In relationships, a similar pattern can appear. At the beginning, there is attentiveness, emotional investment, and effort to demonstrate value. Once a sense of safety emerges, withdrawal may follow. Not because care disappears, but because the early engagement was partly fueled by anxiety about acceptance. Financial behavior can also reflect this cycle. Rapid efforts to increase income, intense focus on optimization, strict control over spending, followed by periods of fatigue and avoidance. The underlying pattern is consistent: activation to secure stability, then exhaustion. The internal paradox is subtle. The person often sees themselves as independent and strong. They are capable of mobilizing quickly. But this strength is closely tied to tension. Independence reduces vulnerability, yet it can also increase isolation. High standards create competence, yet they also maintain constant pressure. This conflict is difficult to notice because the early phase feels productive and socially validated. The exhaustion that follows is attributed to external circumstances. The link between initial overactivation and later depletion remains hidden. From the inside, it feels like fluctuating motivation. From a psychological perspective, it is a system oscillating between control and recovery. When this pattern becomes visible, something subtle changes. The exhaustion at the beginning of new things no longer looks like a flaw in character. It starts to look like a predictable consequence of how activation has been organized for years. The model itself is neither good nor bad. It helped at some point. Rapid mobilization, strong initial effort, and sensitivity to evaluation are effective strategies in environments where stability depends on performance. The system learned to front-load energy to reduce uncertainty. From that perspective, burnout is not a failure. It is the body signaling that a protective response has completed its task. Understanding this reframes the experience. Instead of asking, "Why can't I stay consistent?" a different question emerges: "What am I trying to secure so quickly?" Often the early intensity is less about the task itself and more about managing internal tension. When that tension is acknowledged, the urgency can soften. Awareness does not immediately remove the pattern. The nervous system does not reorganize because of insight alone, but recognition creates space between impulse and action. The beginning of something new can be approached with more observation and less automatic acceleration. Effort can still be present, but it no longer needs to serve as proof of worth or safety. Over time, the person may notice that energy feels more stable when it is not driven by hidden pressure. The work, the relationship, or the project becomes less about securing position and more about sustained engagement. Burning out quickly when starting something new is often a logical response shaped by earlier demands. Seeing that logic does not criticize the past. It simply clarifies the present. And clarity, even without immediate change, alters how a person relates to themselves.